Ahoj, vítejte u další epizody podcastu 2050. Tahle epizoda bude v angličtině a proto jsme se s Peťou rozhodli udělat krátký český úvod, abychom vás motivovali a vy jste si to poslechli i přesto.
I přesto, že v angličtině. Naším hostem je Julian Popov. My jsme ho potkali na konferenci o udržitelných financích, takže to je nějaký jako jeho zázemí, odkud přichází k nám do podcastu. A zároveň on pochází z východní Evropy. On byl kdysi nějakou dobu bulharským ministrem životního prostředí, teďka se pohybuje hodně na té jako úrovni Evropské unie. A my jsme vůbec neplánovali tenhle rozhovor vydat jako celek původně, ale tak nás zaujal, že jsme se rozhodli to zkusit a nabídnout vám opravdu v celku.
To, co podle mě Julian měl dělat moc hezky, že měl velký nadhled nad všemi těmi tématy. Uměl hrozně hezky jednotlivý problémy a konkrétnosti pojmenovávat a strukturovat. Mě se to poslouchalo jak nějaká pohádka a v tom nejlepším možným smyslu, že jsem měla pocit, že mi to tak někdo jako pěkně servíruje a říkala jsem si, jo, jasně, to je super.
Já jsem si u toho vzpomněl na naši úplně první epizodu, kde vlastně naším cílem bylo, pojďme udělat takový jako celkový přehled té transformace. Tak mám dojem, že s Julianem tohle nějak hrozně hezky šlo, že jsme mu tak jako vykopli vždycky téma, hele, tak zelená transformace na evropské úrovni. A on to opravdu uměl jako uchopit do takového příběhu, že dokázal jako odvyprávět nějaký oblouk toho, co se děje, co se má stát, tak kde jsou hlavní bariéry a v tom mi to přijde cenný ten rozhovor. Takže je to spíš taková jako přehledová epizoda, nepůjdeme úplně do detailu, ale ten člověk o tom prostě mluví tak hezky, že jsme to museli vydat.
Zkrátka dobře, my jsme si to užili moc a doufáme, že si to užijete úplně stejně. Teď už nezbývá, než vám popřát příjemný poslech.
I'm Julian Popov. I'm a senior fellow of the European Climate Foundation. I also chair the board of the Building Performance Institute Europe, which is probably the leading think tank in Brussels working on building policies. I'm member of the European Council of Foreign Relations and sit on several boards of organizations that are engaged with energy transition. At some point I was Minister of Environment in Bulgaria. I'm based in London, and when there is no COVID, I travel quite a lot.
There is a green transition going on European level, and it's not an easy task. And I would like to ask you if you could explain the concept of transition risks and difficulties and how to overcome them. And on a level, how would you explain it to, let's say, a college student, to someone who has some education in the topic but is not an expert?
I mean, the green transition is not something new. I mean, a green transition in a way has existed throughout human history because we always strive to do things better, to do things with less resources and less energy, to save energy, and to increase efficiency. There are moments in history when, for one or other reason, we accelerate what we call now green transition. So, for example, during wartime, we have usually national efforts to use less resources. And there are many, many cases in history when we do that. Then there are international crises. A very interesting one is 1973 Arab oil embargo, which actually triggered many of the things that we call now green transition. So, for example, the European energy efficiency policies, which had massive impact on not reducing actual emissions, but reducing emissions compared to expected emissions, but also triggered new technologies, and specifically the wind power modern wind power started as a result of the 70s Arab oil embargoes in Denmark mostly, and then at that time it was almost something that people would laugh at because it didn't sound serious, but now is absolutely a leading energy solutions. And then in the last 10, 15 years, we became much more ambitious and serious and concerned about climate change. And that is another push for the green transition. And now we have the war in Ukraine. I mean, the invasion by Russia, which is another push. And on European level, we had to rethink our Green Deal and Fit for 55 package and made it more ambitious with the so-called Repower Europe. So if I have to summarize, I would say that the green transition is something that we have always been involved. Now we're accelerating it for several reasons. And in terms of difficulties, I think it's difficult, like anything serious that people do, but it's essential, and it would be much more costly and more difficult if we don't do it rather than if we do it. So it's inevitable, and we have to embrace it. And it also offers huge economic and business opportunities.
You've mentioned war in Ukraine as the last or the most recent push towards the green transition. So what do you think will change on the European level? Because you talk, okay, maybe we have to reconsider our ambitions in Fit for 55, etc. So are there any talks? What should we change? Some specific, concrete examples?
Yes, I mean, there are already not just suggestions, but political decisions. So, for example, to reduce and to move out of use of Russian fossil fuels. So the argument is when exactly, with how much. But generally, the decision is that in the next 2-3 years, we'll move completely, almost completely, out of Russian fossil fuel imports. So the big question here is, are we going to replace Russian gas and Russian oil and Russian coal with some other oil and gas? Or we are going to replace Russian gas with a mixture of solutions, and with what part of the replacement will be other gas and what part of the replacement will be something else. And I think this is the most important issue for several reasons. First, if we go more ambitiously in the green way, so reduction of emissions, reduction of overall use of gas, that will be consistent with our initial climate goals. But also there is a very serious economic argument. If we just replace Russian gas with some other gas, we will maintain very high prices of gas, because that will create additional bottlenecks and shortages and supply chain issues, and energy will be very expensive. In order to reduce the cost of energy, we have to reduce the use of these fuels also on a global scale. So this is the economic argument, and also social argument, because high energy prices bring very high social cost. So for all these reasons, we have to work very hard to find ways of replacing Russian gas with energy efficiency, with heat pumps, with renewable energy, with biogas, and with hundreds of other solutions that are already available and commercially available.
I would like to ask about the finance sector. How can the finance sector help to enable or even enforce maybe the change towards low carbon economy? Because the talk is that finance sector is crucial, and the European Commission is kind of using the finance sector, through the finance sector we want to propagate the changes to the rest of the industries. So what is the role, and what are the tools that the finance sector can use?
I think it's very important, all these solutions, to be put on good commercial ground, even when they're based on grant money. Very often people would say, oh, these are just grants and we'll spend the money and we'll do something good or we will waste the money, which happens sometimes. It is important to use public finances to create good financial instruments and good commercial mechanisms, and to accelerate commercial processes, because otherwise the whole business system and the whole economy becomes very sluggish and lazy and just expecting to be fueled with more public money and more public money. And it is in the essence of successful business to fight. To fight to succeed, because if there is no fight, if there is no competition, there is no efficiency, there is no success. There is just waste of resources, and we're here in the business of saving resources rather than wasting them. So, and the European Commission is using mainly finances and a little bit less than necessary the financial sector. It has to work much more closely with the commercial financial sector and find ways of maximizing the public financial support. To give you one example, when it comes to energy efficiency of buildings, which is funded now through the Recovery and Resilience Fund and through many other public funds, there are many cases in which these funds go straight into building retrofit. And that creates some good result because we have better efficiency of buildings. But it doesn't provide sufficient financial and business result. We have to blend the public funds with other financial instruments. It's very important to blend them with future savings of energy and to bring them as an upfront investment. And this is basically a financial instrument. This is something that banks and funds can do, and they know how to do it, so they have to be involved in that. And then we do have to have competition, and we do have to have open tenders, even for not just to pick the best offer, but to pick the offer that would create a lively sector. So that is sort of quite important in my view.
I'll follow up on your last two sentences. What kind of changes in the mindset of bankers, investors will need to happen towards the sustainable economy?
Well, I mean, the first thing that is happening, but they should start looking much more into the financial risks associated with carbon emissions. So that includes disclosure of carbon emissions, thinking and analyzing the carbon emission paths of their clients, discussing with their clients how seriously they take their future climate carbon emissions, and whether they have plans that are consistent with our net zero targets. Generally, most countries have net zero targets for 2050. Because if a company doesn't have a plan for its carbon reduction, the carbon emissions at some point will start being a financial burden on the company and financial risk. So that's why it is very important. At the moment, only part of the emissions are covered by the emission trading system, but now we're discussing the extension of the emission trading systems to cover transport, to cover buildings. there is a lot of opposition to that, but sooner or later it will happen. So every single ton of CO2 emissions will have some financial dimension, whether it is direct price or something else related to regulations or target. And if that's not taken into account, then companies that banks are dealing with are exposed to risk that is not disclosed and not taken into account in the relations with the banks. So that's, I think, the main thing that banks have to do, start being much more alert and pushy and engaged in this conversations, disclosure, and carbon risk assessment. And of course, the other thing is assessing climate risk, because carbon risk is one thing, climate risk and is something different, and it has to be taken also into account.
I would like to focus on European transition as a whole. You are probably one of the people who might be able to compare how the transition will have to happen in different regions of Europe. And we can talk about just transition, or we can just talk about the differences between different parts of Europe. So could you please name some specific differences between states of Europe and their different needs in the transition and different approaches, and how would you approach them from a European point of view?
Yeah, I mean, the green transition and the low carbon transition is different in different countries for different reasons. I mean, one is just geography. I mean, you do things in one way in the south, in a different way in the north, because you need different amount of energy for heating, for instance. You do things in one way in places where there is a lot of sun, and in a different way where there is a lot of wind, and in a quite different way if you have significant hydropower around, because hydropower gives you an opportunity to expand also your variable renewables, because hydropower is dispatchable power, it's renewable, clean power, but you can stop and start it at any point. So you can match the variability of solar and wind. So these geographic differences are very, very important. We have one slight political problem that the most active countries, some of the most active countries in the transition from policy point of view, are Germany and UK, and both countries don't have much hydropower, so many policies don't take hydropower into account because they originate in these countries. But if we go to the Nordic countries and we see, Norway, for instance, or if you go to the south, the Balkan countries, where there is quite a lot, or Austria, which is near the Balkans, then we will see that this kind of link between hydro and variable renewables work very, very well, and it's very important. The other difference is, of course, industrial differences and the different type of industries and different types of energy mixes. But also we have political legacy differences. And here I clearly refer to the division between the former communist part and the non-communist, the democratic part of Europe in the past. And for some reason, East European countries are being quite sort of skeptical and resentful about the transition. Not all and not always, but as a general trend. And I think there is a serious risk here for Central and East European countries that they will be left behind simply because they're making this point always that we are poorer and that's why we will go slower. That was a reasonable argument 10, 15 years ago when the transition was just something very expensive. Now things are the other way around. The transition brings cheaper energy, more efficient economy, it brings innovation, it brings better education. So by saying we will take it slowly means that we will develop more slowly than the Western countries. And it's the Eastern countries that are lagging behind. They should do things faster rather than slower. Otherwise, they will kind of be left far, far behind. And the gap between the East and the West in terms of technologies, in terms of clean air, if you want, and other associated benefits with the transition, this gap will become wider rather than narrower. And this is a big risk of the transition.
I'm thinking of an example to compare it, an example of India, which is definitely less developed than East European countries, and their climate goals and their transition goals are much more ambitious. So just to compare, maybe we as a country, as Czech Republic, we can look even far to the east, not only to the west, for inspiration.
Well, India is a very interesting country. In principle, if we want the Paris Agreement to work, we have to address India and Africa. If India and Africa follow the same trajectory of their carbon emissions as China, we can forget about the Paris Agreement, we can forget about 1.5 degrees, we can forget about 2 degrees. India is an interesting case. On one hand, it is ambitious in terms of installing a lot of renewable power. Politically, it is still quite shy to declare early dates for net zero. They're reluctant to say 2050. They said later day. But it is understandable there because it's a huge country and the coal consumption is very big. And they still don't have a solution which is agreed on their coal transition. I think they have a fantastic opportunity, but it will take a little bit of time to deal with their industries, their way of doing business, and so on. And we will see India suddenly take off, or at least I hope so.
Well, I'd like to go back to Europe, or maybe even the whole world. I'm not really sure, because you've mentioned, okay, there are some differences between countries, between regions. So my question is, so what is the ideal versus realistic goal for 2030 or 2050? And I'm talking about green transition in general.
I mean, the ideal goal was mentioned, actually stated by the group of G7 to have by 2035, I think, predominantly clean electricity. So I think it's a realistic, ambitious, but realistic to have the European Union to have by 2030 or 2035 almost 100% net zero electricity system. So this is difficult because we have to not only clean the existing electricity system, but we have to expand it because part of electricity at the moment covers something like 20 or 22% of the energy mix, and we have to increase it by 2035 probably to make electricity take, 40% of the energy mix, double it. So we have to double the use of electricity and we have to clean it. So it's a big, big task. But I think it is possible because now we're seeing an exponential growth in renewables. because the technology is not just cheap, but it's also socially very well known. Technologies are very familiar, and also with the high prices of last year of energy, but now pushed even further by the invasion of Ukraine, this is becoming almost necessity. So we will see very, very rapid increase in renewable energy. We will see decline of the cost of hydrogen. So if we look at the US and the Americans, they like this kind of great titles. So they have this so-called earth shots, which follow the moon shot and the sun shot, and now they have earth shots. And they have, the Department of Energy has 3 earth shots, and one of them is the so-called 111. In 1 decade, to get 1 kilogram of hydrogen at the price of $1. So basically, to put it simply, to make hydrogen quite cheap. If the Americans do it, it will not be done in America. It will be done globally, basically. But there is a big global competition on lowering the price of green hydrogen. So that might happen. So hydrogen will help. We will not heat our homes with hydrogen, and we will not produce electricity with hydrogen, but we will be able to decarbonize our industries with hydrogen. Then batteries, again, it's another earth shot, but we see the decline a rapid decline of the cost of batteries. But there are other technologies like sort of mechanical storage, expansion of hydro storage, and so on and so on. In the next 10 years, we will see exponential increase of all these energies, all these solutions, plus the combination of them, sort of how they work together. This is very much a kind of algorithm and digital thing, but that is advancing. So when somebody says, "Well, we can't do with renewables because the sun doesn't shine in the night, the wind doesn't blow all the time," I mean, that's kind of silly talk from 10 years ago. I mean, in 10 years, all that will not be a problem at all. It will be solved. So the combination between massive expansion of various renewables, plus the management of their interdependency and combination, could bring us to, in 2035, to 100% clean electricity.
You were describing it a lot from a technology point of view. What is your view on, let's say, social changes, or what mindsets do we have to change, or is realistic that we will change as a society to the year 2035 in Europe? Because in Czech Republic, we are society divided a lot. And I think we have a lot of work there too, not just in the technology sector. What is your view on that?
The thing is that, I mean, good people do good things and bad people do bad things, and indifferent people don't care. And the problem is that good people are minority, so the rest are either bad or indifferent and don't care. So if we just rely on people changing, we have behavioral change among, 10% of the population, and the rest, just don't care or don't want to make the effort. So, but behavioral change is very much related to also technological opportunities, but also political decisions, organizations, fashion, and we see that happening. And it is becoming more easier and easier to to burn less, simply because now light bulbs, for instance, are LED light bulbs, and they are good light bulbs, and they fit the old fittings. Because, 5 years ago, if you wanted to replace your old light bulb with a new light bulb, it's kind of a heroic effort because it doesn't fit. You make the mission of your life. And now it's just a little bit more expensive. It's better because it can have white light and blue light and yellow light and whatever. So it becomes more attractive. So you're more attracted, and it's easier to change your behavior when it comes to lighting. The same thing with electric cars. Anybody who has driven an electric car doesn't want to drive a non-electric car because it's a massive pleasure to drive electric car. So behavior will change, not because I want to drive electric car to save the planet, but because suddenly I will realize that the electric car is better. It saves me money, but even if I have a lot of money, it's just better. It's better feeling. If you're one of these kind of boys with toys, it accelerates even more than an internal combustion engine. So these things will come as an avalanche of changing behavior, and probably in 10 years we will think about internal combustion engines as we'll look at them like we look at steam engines at the moment. We'll wonder why on earth anybody was driving cars with an internal combustion engine.
So I think we have last question ahead of us, and that is, what do you think are the main challenges for transition in buildings or energy efficiency sector, and how to approach them?
And maybe I'd like to add, what are the buildings of the future going to look like? Are they going to be just energy neutral, or are they going to be active part of the energy system, or something else?
Do we have 2 more hours for that?
Well, not exactly.
If you do, we can make it.
Well, in order to change buildings, the building sector is very conservative. For the builders, from the delivery side, the builders are conservative, and people are conservative. If somebody comes to your home and says, "Well, we'll change everything now here," and you say, "No, I don't want. I like as it is. I don't want disruption. I don't want the mess. I don't want different windows because I like my windows," and so on. So that makes the sector very, very difficult. We need financial instruments because one of the barriers is the high upfront investment. So because of that, we need this blending. So take the savings of the future, ask a bank how to do it. The bank will create an instrument, give you the money, then they will pay from the future savings, or talk to utility companies, or the government includes some of the building cost in your taxes. There are many different approaches so that you secure the upfront investment. Then there are things have to be done in a highly efficient way. So there is a system, for instance, called building passports, which are not exactly passports. They are more like plans for development of a building to get it to high efficiency level. This is very good, every single building to have, because then you can do step-by-step renovation. Whenever you have money, you can change the windows with proper windows and not do kind of cheap renovation everywhere, which you get stuck into some kind of a half or 1/4 solution of what you're facing. And then we need a lot of education. Education of builders, but also education of owners. We don't know what is the right temperature to live in. We don't know how damp the air in our room is, how clean or dirty usually the air inside a room is dirtier than outside, and that's a little bit counterintuitive, but we don't always know that. So there are a lot of things that we have to educate ourselves about our own buildings, so that we can require after that the right development and renovation of the building. The buildings of the future is very difficult to predict because the way of life is changing. So over COVID, we moved back to our homes. We turned our homes into offices. Now we're moving out of our homes, but some people are staying in their homes. Then some people who can work from home decides to move out of the city and live in the country and have their conversations and work from a distance. So there is a certain level of uncertainty about what will happen with buildings in the future. But one thing that is quite sort of certain is that the energy role of buildings will change. I mean, not just that buildings will consume and produce energy, but they will also store energy, balance energy. And this is something that we call buildings are turning into micro-energy hubs. So they will not become independent. I mean, some buildings obviously can become independent, but that's a little bit excessive. But they will connect with each other and they will be able to communicate and share energy and balance energy, store energy. And when you put the car into the whole equation, then you have a building, probably with a battery, probably with solar panels, probably with something on the top that heats water, maybe with a little bit of grass on the roof. And then you have a garage or a parking space somewhere where you have your electric car, which electric cars will not be charged from the building, but will work together with the building. When you have excess electricity, it will go in the battery, then it will come back, and so on. So the energy future of the building is quite complex and quite exciting, and we can see that already happening. So the world of buildings is changing and will contribute to the overall reduction of emissions. Big question is, we were talking earlier about India, but big question is what will be the building of the future around the world? And I would be very, very keen for the developed world to start working on energy efficient and comfortable buildings for poorer countries, so that they can not follow this road of upgrading step by step very bad quality buildings, but from the very beginning almost to have off-the-shelf solutions which are comfortable so that they can leapfrog their quality of life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tak to byl Julian Popov. My přepneme zpátky do češtiny. Poděkujeme mu takhle na dálku za rozhovor. On už to asi neuslyší a když tomu uslyší, tak tomu minimálně nebude rozumět. Ale každopádně jsme moc vděční za to, že tady mohl být naším hostem. My bychom na závěr chtěli zase přidat rubriku Zaujalo nás, co nás v poslední době zaujalo, a nemusí to být nutně aktualita, ale tak, co jsme četli, viděli, poslouchali a tak dále. Zažili, přesně. Tak co jsi zažila ty, Hani?
Já jsem zažila to, že jsem nedávno moderovala konferenci Udržitelně a dostupně v Českém senátu, což mimochodem samo o sobě bylo hrozně hezký a velkolepý. A kromě toho, že jsem tam potkala hosty, který bych strašně moc ráda dostala i do tohohle podcastu, tak jsem se dozvěděla několik zajímavostí, které bych chtěla sdílet. Jedna z těch zajímavostí se týkala naší přenosové sítě. Já jsem si vždycky myslela, že potřebujeme tu naši síť teda posílit, aby jsme to s těma obnovitelnýma zdrojema zvládli, když třeba v Německu budou vyrábět fakt hodně, takže budeme moct jako nějakou energii dostat i k nám.
Takže energetika je to téma.
Energetika byla to téma, to jsem neřekla. Tak jsem se dozvěděla, že je to právě naopak, že naše síť je na tom dobře a už relativně připravená, ale to posílení v prvé řadě musí přijít na německé straně, což mě překvapilo vzhledem k tomu, jak se u nás staví dálnice, tak jsem očekávala podobný vzorec i u energetiky.
Že Němci zdržují naši dekarbonizaci.
No tak tyhle závěry bych z toho nedělala, ale co se posílení sítě týče, tak tohle by se mělo začít dít právě na německé straně. No a co v poslední době zaujalo tebe?
Mě zaujaly 2 zprávy, které jsem viděl v médiích a jedna z nich je z článku na iRozhlase, který pojednával o odlesňování amazonského pralesa a je docela depresivní, protože říkal, že v současnosti bylo odlesněno už 17% pralesa a že body zlomu, při kterých se nenávratně poruší odtokový poměry celé té oblasti, to znamená, ta oblast se začne měnit na savanu a tak dál, tak body zlomu jsou nějakých 20 až 25% odlesnění, takže nejsme vůbec daleko. Tak to doufejme, že z výsledky voleb v Brazílii to změní a že se v tom nějak posuneme. No. Tak to je jedna taková depresivní věc. A druhá, která je vlastně velmi pozitivní, je zpráva z COPu, z egyptské konference, která nedávno skončila. Státy se dohodly, že založí nový fond, ze kterého budou hradit ztráty a škody způsobené změnou klimatu v rozvojových zemích. Takže to je pro rozvojový svět určitě super zpráva. Zatím není jasné, kdo do toho fondu bude přesně přispívat, jakým způsobem se ty peníze budou rozdělovat, to je na další jednání, ale tenhle ten první krok je určitě zásadní, tak to je dobrý krok vpřed.
To je super zpráva na závěr. Přátelé, my moc děkujeme za poslech a budeme se zase příště těšit. Naslyšenou.
Mějte se hezky, ahoj.